She had always played music quietly, the kind of music that stayed in small rooms and even smaller hearts. People who knew her sometimes said she had a gift, but she rarely thought about herself that way. Music was just part of her life, a way to breathe when the world felt heavy or too loud. She never imagined it could reach beyond the walls of her small apartment or the little cafes she sometimes played in. The day began like any other. Sunlight peeked through the curtains, dust sparkling in the morning air. She moved around slowly, careful not to wake the others in her home. Her fingers itched for the piano, and she spent a few minutes running her hands over the keys, listening to the soft, warm sound that always made her heart feel lighter. Today, however, felt different. There was a tension she could not name, a whisper of something waiting just beyond the normal rhythm of life. She received a message that morning. A local community center was hosting a small event to celebrate local talent, and they needed someone to play a few pieces. The message was short but polite. They hoped she could perform a simple melody for the gathering. Seemed easy, almost too easy. She laughed softly to herself. A simple melody? That was nothing. She had played far more complex pieces countless times. Yet, a small flutter of nerves found its way into her chest. Arriving at the venue, she noticed the modest setting. It was a cozy hall, not fancy or large, just enough chairs for maybe 50 people. A few tables lined the sides with small refreshments, and the stage was barely raised, just enough to make the performer visible. She looked around, noticing the quiet anticipation. People were chatting softly, some drinking coffee, others flipping through programs. The room smelled faintly of wood and polished floors, a comforting smell that reminded her of the small theaters she had visited as a child. She carried her instrument carefully onto the stage, setting it in place with gentle hands. Her mind wandered briefly, remembering the first time she had played in front of a group. She had been young, trembling as she struck the keys, but something inside her had clicked. That first sound had made her feel alive in a way nothing else could. Today, she hoped to capture that feeling again, even if it was just for a simple melody. As she sat down, she noticed a few familiar faces in the crowd. People who had heard her play in smaller settings nodded with quiet encouragement. Their smiles made her chest tighten slightly, a mix of gratitude and nerves. The room seemed to hush naturally as the organizer stepped forward and introduced her. The words were polite, nothing grand, just enough to signal that it was her moment. She took a deep breath and let her fingers rest on the keys. The melody began softly, almost hesitantly at first. It was a familiar tune, one that she had played countless times. Her hands moved as if on autopilot, each note finding its place. At first, it was simple, almost plain, just as the organizers had requested. But as she played, something unexpected began to happen. The music seemed to take on a life of its own. Her fingers, guided by memories and emotions she had not realized were buried so deeply, started to add small variations, subtle flourishes that made the melody richer, fuller. The audience, initially polite and quiet, began to lean forward, sensing the change. They were listening more intently, drawn in by a sound that was familiar yet strangely moving. She felt a strange energy in the room, a connection she had never noticed before. It was as if the walls themselves were listening, leaning in to catch every note. Her nervousness faded, replaced by a flow of focus that seemed almost magical. Each chord she struck resonated beyond the simple notes she had intended to play. The melody was no longer simple. It had become a story, an emotion shared between her and everyone watching. One person in the audience wiped a tear discreetly. Another smiled with a soft, breathless expression. She noticed them, but she did not stop playing. She could feel the music moving through her, carrying memories of joy and sorrow, hope and longing. It was as if all the moments of her life had led to this one small stage, this simple melody that was no longer simple at all. The room was silent except for the sound of the piano. Even the usual murmurs and coughs had disappeared. Everyone was captivated, though no one seemed to realize it consciously. The energy was subtle, yet undeniable, a thread weaving through each person in the hall. She could feel it as she played, a gentle but powerful force that encouraged her to keep going, to explore further, to pour herself completely into the music. She remembered the people she had played for when she was younger, the small audiences in dimly lit rooms, the moments of quiet connection that had made her feel seen. She thought of her family, the struggles they had endured, the sacrifices made quietly and without expectation. She thought of friends who had come and gone, leaving traces of laughter and lessons in her life. All of this flowed through her fingers, shaping the melody into something beyond what she had planned. Minutes passed, though she did not notice them. The music felt timeless, each note lingering in the air like a soft, warm light. She added gentle pauses, allowing the audience to breathe and absorb the emotions carried by the piano. She smiled without realizing it, feeling the joy that came from sharing something deeply personal, something that had no words but spoke to the heart. As she played the final notes, she felt a rush of clarity. The room seemed to exhale with her, a collective recognition of the beauty that had unfolded. The simple melody had transformed into an experience, a moment that felt larger than herself yet intimately connected to her. She lifted her hands from the keys, heart racing, unsure of how long she had been playing, but certain that it had been meaningful. There was a pause, a moment of silence that seemed to stretch, before the audience erupted into applause. It was not just polite clapping, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation. Some people stood, others cheered softly, and a few whispered to each other with awe in their voices. She felt overwhelmed, a mixture of relief and disbelief. This had started as a small, simple request, and now it felt like a turning point, a recognition of something she had always known but never fully embraced. After the applause, she stepped back from the piano, breathing deeply. People approached her, offering words of praise and gratitude. A few asked for her name, wanting to remember the musician who had turned a simple melody into something unforgettable. She smiled, feeling a warmth she could not describe. It was not about fame or recognition, but about the connection, the shared experience that had moved everyone in the room. As she packed up her instrument later, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. She realized that music had always been more than notes on a page, more than a pastime. It was a way to communicate, to express, to touch lives without speaking. The simple melody had been a vessel for something larger, a reminder that even the smallest moments could carry profound meaning. Walking home that evening, she replayed the experience in her mind. She thought about the people she had touched, the emotions she had stirred, and the quiet power of embracing her talent fully. She felt a sense of purpose, a clarity she had never experienced before. The world seemed brighter, possibilities more open, and her own confidence quietly strengthened. That night, as she lay down to sleep, the simple melody lingered in her mind, not as a song she had played, but as a memory, a promise, and a turning point. She realized that sometimes, what begins as a small, simple act can unfold into something extraordinary, changing not only the lives of others, but the course of one's own life as well. The journey had begun, and she felt ready to see where it would take her next. The applause had barely faded when she felt a strange energy in the air. It was more than just clapping hands or polite smiles. The people around her seemed lighter, their faces brighter, almost as if something invisible had lifted a weight from their shoulders. She had always played for small groups, but nothing had ever felt like this. It was not just music. It was a shared feeling, a quiet understanding passing from her fingers to everyone in the room. As she looked around, she noticed a few people who had been whispering to each other now staring directly at her. Their eyes were wide, reflecting a mix of surprise and admiration. A young woman approached timidly and said, "I have never felt something like this from a song before. How did you do that?" She smiled softly, unsure what to say. It was not about skill or technique alone. It was something deeper, something that could not be explained with words. The organizer came forward, her expression one of amazement. She said something about how no one had expected such a performance from a simple request. The words were flattering, but she felt almost embarrassed. She had only played what she felt in that moment, not to impress anyone or to show off. Yet, seeing the reaction around her, she realized that the music had moved people more than she could have imagined. Backstage, She could still hear snippets of conversation, people talking about the melody, the way it had grown and changed, the emotions it had carried. She leaned against the wall for a moment, catching her breath. A sense of disbelief washed over her. How could something so small, so ordinary at the beginning, become so powerful? She had started with a simple melody, and somehow it had turned into an experience that left everyone changed. The crowd slowly began to disperse, but a few lingered, hoping for more. One elderly man, who had been quietly sitting in the corner, came up and said, "You have a gift that goes beyond music. You touch people's hearts." His words were simple, but they carried weight. She nodded, feeling a lump in her throat. It was strange to hear her music described this way, yet it felt honest, and it made her feel seen in a way she had not expected. She returned home later, still carrying the energy of the performance with her. Every step felt lighter. Every sound in the city seemed brighter, almost humming in harmony with the melody she had played. She sat down at her piano, almost unconsciously, replaying pieces of the performance in her mind. She realized that her music had a life of its own, something that could grow beyond her intention and touch others in ways she could never predict. The next few days were different. People who had attended the event sent messages, expressing how much the music had meant to them. Some described memories it had awakened. Some said it had given them hope during difficult times. She read each message carefully, feeling warmth and a strange sense of responsibility. Her music had a power she had never fully acknowledged, and now she could not ignore it. She thought about why this particular performance had been different. Perhaps it was the honesty with which she played, the emotions she allowed to flow through her fingers without judgment. Perhaps it was the attention of the audience, fully present and open. Or perhaps it was something entirely unexplainable, a connection that happened only once in a while, between a musician and those listening. As she reflected, she began to experiment with her playing in small ways. Notes that were once simple took on subtle variations, rhythms changed slightly, and melodies grew richer. She realized that music was not just about hitting the right keys but about feeling every note and letting it speak for itself. The audience at that event had felt that, and she wanted to continue exploring it. Word of her performance started spreading quietly. People who had attended told friends, and a few local news outlets mentioned the young musician who had transformed a simple melody into something unforgettable. She did not seek recognition, but it found her anyway. Invitations arrived to play at small gatherings, community events, and even local schools. Each request carried the hope that her music would create the same kind of connection it had before. She was nervous each time, wondering if the magic of that first performance could be repeated. Every audience was different, every room had its own energy, and she knew she could not control the way people would respond. But she also knew that the key was honesty and openness. The music had to come from her heart, not from a desire to impress or achieve fame. One evening, she was invited to play at a small school. Children gathered around, curious and bright-eyed. At first, they were distracted, whispering to each other and fidgeting in their seats. But as soon as she began to play, their attention shifted. They leaned forward, silent and amazed, as if the piano had become a storyteller. She smiled quietly, feeling the same connection she had felt before, a bond forming without words, without effort, just through the music itself. After the performance, teachers and parents came up, thanking her for sharing something so special with the children. They spoke about how the music had sparked imagination, quieted restless minds, and brought a sense of calm and joy. She listened, feeling humble and deeply moved. Music had always been a personal sanctuary for her, but now it was becoming a bridge to others, a way to connect and communicate beyond ordinary conversation. In her quiet moments, she began to reflect on how far she had come. The simple request that had led to her first unforgettable performance had opened doors she had never expected. She realized that her own doubts and hesitations had held her back more than any external obstacles. By trusting herself and the music, she had discovered a depth of expression she had not known existed. Even in ordinary moments, she felt the music lingering. The sounds of her city walks, the chatter in cafes, the laughter of friends. They all carried echoes of melodies waiting to be shaped. She started carrying a small notebook, jotting down rhythms and ideas, little fragments that could grow into songs later. Her mind was alive with possibilities, each one inspired by the simple melody that had changed everything. She also noticed a subtle change in the people around her. Friends and family seemed more attentive, colleagues more curious, strangers more open. It was as if her music had not only affected her audiences but had quietly influenced the way she interacted with the world. She became more patient, more observant, and more willing to embrace small moments of beauty. One evening, she received a letter from someone who had attended the original event. The writer explained how the performance had helped them through a difficult time, giving them courage to face challenges they had been avoiding. She read the words slowly, letting each sentence sink in. It was one thing to feel the connection in the moment, but another to realize that the music could continue to touch lives long after it had been played. This understanding began to shape the way she approached every performance. She no longer saw each melody as a task or obligation. Instead, each note became an opportunity, a chance to create an experience, to share a piece of her heart with others. She felt a quiet responsibility to honor that, but it was not burdensome. It was inspiring, a motivation that made her want to practice, to explore, and to grow as a musician. The simple melody had begun as a small thing, a brief request for a modest performance, but it had revealed something larger. It had shown her that music could be transformative, not just for the audience but for herself. She understood now that each performance was a journey, a chance to discover new aspects of her own heart and to share that discovery with the world. As weeks passed, she continued to play at local events and small gatherings, always remembering the first time she had felt that extraordinary connection. Each performance was different, each audience unique, but the essence remained the same: honesty, emotion, and the willingness to let the music speak. And with each note, she felt herself changing, growing more confident, more connected, and more aware of the quiet power she carried within her. Through it all, she remained humble. She never forgot that the magic came not from her alone but from the shared energy between performer and listener. The simple melody had unleashed something unexpected, something beyond her control, and it was a reminder that even small actions could create ripples far beyond what one could imagine. She had begun to see the world differently, with eyes and ears attuned to beauty, emotion, and connection, ready for whatever came next. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of anticipation. She stepped onto the small stage of a local hall, feeling a familiar mixture of nerves and excitement. Though she had performed for audiences before, this evening felt different. The simple melody she had been asked to play was expected by many, but she carried with her the knowledge of what had happened last time. A simple tune had transformed into something extraordinary. She wondered if it could happen again. She sat at the piano, her hands hovering above the keys. The audience waited, their faces calm but expectant, like a lake that was about to ripple with movement. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the fluttering in her chest, and pressed the first note. The sound was soft, delicate, almost hesitant, but it immediately felt familiar. It was the melody that had started it all. A tune so simple that it almost seemed ordinary, yet in her hands, it carried a quiet power. As she played, she felt herself slipping into the flow of the music. The simple notes she had practiced countless times began to take on a new shape. They stretched and curved, rising and falling in ways that surprised even her. It was as if the piano itself had a voice, guiding her through emotions she had not expected to feel. Her fingers moved faster now, but not with haste. They moved with purpose, as if the melody had a mind of its own. The audience noticed the change immediately. Some leaned forward, their eyes wide with curiosity, as if sensing that the music was more than it appeared. Others closed their eyes, letting the sounds wash over them, unaware of the minutes passing. A few whispered softly to each other, caught in the moment, trying to understand what was happening but unable to put it into words. The simple melody had begun to grow, becoming richer, deeper, and far more powerful than anyone had imagined. She felt a strange energy building in the room, a connection that went beyond sound. The music was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone listening. She could feel it in their reactions. The quiet intake of breath, the slight nods, the smiles that appeared and vanished as emotions stirred within them. Every note she played seemed to echo something in the hearts of the listeners, a shared understanding that needed no explanation. A sudden flourish of chords erupted from the piano, surprising even her. She had not planned it, but it felt right. Her hands moved with a confidence that surprised her, each note intentional, yet free. The melody soared and dipped, carrying a story she had never realized was inside her. It was a story of joy, of sorrow, of longing, of hope, all rolled into one seamless thread of sound. She could feel her heart pounding in time with the music, a rhythm that connected her to every person in the room. One elderly woman in the front row began to cry quietly, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. A young man near the back sat frozen, listening as if afraid to move, afraid that even the smallest shift could break the spell. She noticed them, not in judgment but in awe. Their reactions were mirrors of what she felt inside. Music had always been her companion, but this was the first time she felt it as a bridge between herself and others, an invisible thread tying them all together. As she continued, she let go completely. The music was no longer about perfection, about playing the notes correctly. It was about feeling, about expressing the emotions that had built up over years of practice, life experiences, and quiet observation. She thought of her childhood, the moments of happiness and sadness, the people who had influenced her, the small joys that often went unnoticed. Each memory became a note, each feeling a chord, and together they created a performance that was living, breathing, and raw. The room held its collective breath as the melody swelled. She added pauses, letting silence become part of the music, creating tension and release, drawing the audience deeper into the experience. She felt their focus like a gentle pressure, urging her to explore further, to be more daring, to show more of herself. The simple melody she had started with was gone, replaced by a performance that was fluid, unpredictable, and full of life. Somewhere near the middle, she closed her eyes. The world outside disappeared, leaving only the piano, her hands, and the audience's invisible presence. She felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness but from the intensity of connection. This was why she played music, why she had dedicated so much of her life to it. It was not about applause or recognition. It was about moments like this, moments that could change hearts and minds, even if just for a few minutes. The music grew louder, more expressive, yet every note remained delicate, carefully placed. She felt a rhythm in the room, a shared pulse between herself and the audience. Every breath, every subtle movement of a head or a hand, every sigh or smile was part of the performance. The piano was no longer an instrument but a voice, and together with the people listening, they were creating something unique and fleeting, beautiful and fragile. As the final section approached, she felt the story of the melody reaching its peak. The chords became full, resonant, carrying weight and emotion that seemed to fill every corner of the hall. She could sense the audience leaning in, hearts beating in sync with her music. Each note lingered in the air longer than it should, as if time itself had slowed to listen. The performance was not hers alone. It belonged to everyone, and in that moment, she understood the power of sharing something real. Finally, she struck the last chord, a sound so clear and sustained that it seemed to hang in the air, echoing in the hearts of all who heard it. She lifted her hands slowly, almost reluctantly, afraid to break the connection she had built. For a moment, there was silence, a pause so complete that it felt like the world had stopped just to hold the final note. Then, slowly, applause began to ripple through the room, growing louder and stronger until it filled every space. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering, some with tears still in their eyes. A few whispered words of admiration, and others simply stared in awe, unsure how to express what they had just experienced. She sat back, breathing heavily, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The energy in the room was electric, yet gentle, as if the performance had created a shared secret, a moment that would linger long after the applause ended. She felt someone gently tap her shoulder. It was the organizer, smiling widely. "That was more than we could have imagined," they said. It was incredible." She nodded, too overwhelmed for words. The performance had gone beyond her intentions, transforming a simple melody into something that seemed almost alive. She had not planned it, but in letting herself be guided by emotion, she had reached a place that was more powerful than she could have known. After the event, as people slowly filed out, many stayed behind to speak with her. They shared how the music had touched them, made them remember something long forgotten, or simply allowed them to feel deeply in a way they had not in years. Some asked questions about her inspiration, her process, and even her background. She answered as best she could, but mostly she listened, absorbing the gratitude and wonder that flowed toward her. Walking home that night, she felt changed. The performance had been more than a success. It had been a revelation. She realized that music, when played honestly and with openness, could transform ordinary moments into extraordinary experiences. It was not about skill alone, but about courage, expression, and connection. Each performance held the potential to touch lives in ways she could never predict. She returned to her small apartment and sat quietly at the piano. The room was dim, the city lights casting soft shadows through the windows. She played the melody again, gently, thoughtfully, savoring the emotions that had come to the surface. It was no longer a simple tune but a reflection of the experience, a reminder that she had reached something remarkable. The notes flowed easily, carrying both memory and meaning, and she felt a sense of peace and fulfillment she had never known before. The night deepened, and she finally leaned back, her fingers resting on the keys. She thought about the audience, the energy, the connection, and the way a simple melody had transformed into something unforgettable. She understood now that the power of music was not in the notes themselves but in the honesty and vulnerability she brought to them. The melody was a bridge, a messenger, and in sharing it, she had shared herself. As she prepared to sleep, the memory of the performance lingered. It was not just the applause or the recognition, but the quiet understanding that she could create something meaningful, something that touched hearts. She knew that this was only the beginning, that each note she played from now on carried the potential for new connections and new moments of beauty. The simple melody had changed everything, and she felt ready to explore what came next, with courage, passion, and an open heart. The applause from her last performance still echoed in her mind, a reminder of what could happen when she allowed herself to play freely. But life continued, as it always does, and she found herself navigating new opportunities and challenges that came in unexpected ways. Invitations to perform began arriving more frequently, some for small gatherings, others for larger local events. She felt a mixture of excitement and hesitation each time, wondering if she could capture the magic again, or if it had been a one-time experience. One afternoon, she received a message from a local community organizer who had heard about her performance. They asked if she could play for a fundraising event that aimed to support underprivileged children. The request was simple: play a few pieces during the evening. She paused for a moment, thinking about the audience she would face. Unlike the quiet hall of her previous performance, this event promised a larger crowd, with people she had never met. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but beneath it was also a quiet excitement, the sense that she could bring something meaningful to others. The day of the event arrived, and the venue was busier than she had anticipated. People milled about, chatting, laughing, and sipping drinks, unaware of the music that was about to fill the space. She carried her instrument to the small stage, setting it carefully as she tried to calm her racing thoughts. She reminded herself that the goal was not perfection, but connection. She thought about the children the fundraiser was supporting and felt a renewed sense of purpose. The music she played tonight could be more than entertainment. It could be a gift. When she began, the melody was soft, cautious at first, just like the beginning of all her performances. She felt the familiar rhythm of her own heart guiding her fingers, each note building a bridge between her and the audience. At first, people chatted quietly, not paying full attention, but as the melody deepened, a change swept through the room. Conversations slowed, Heads turned toward the piano, and a quiet hush settled over the crowd. The simple melody she had started with began to evolve, shaped by her emotions and intuition, just as it had before. The audience began to respond in subtle ways. Some leaned forward, absorbed in the music. A few closed their eyes, letting the sound carry them. Children who had been restless quieted, captivated by the flow of notes. She felt the energy in the room shift, a shared pulse forming between her and those listening. It was no longer just her performance. It had become a collective experience, a moment that belonged to everyone present. As the melody grew, she allowed herself to explore more freely. She added small flourishes and variations, weaving in emotions that had built up over the past weeks. Each chord she struck carried intention, a quiet expression of her hopes, fears, and joy. The music seemed to stretch beyond the room, reaching into hearts in ways that words never could. She noticed people moved by the performance, their faces reflecting surprise, awe, and sometimes tears. It was a reminder that music had a unique power, one that could touch people in ways she had never imagined. After the performance, the reaction was immediate. People approached her, expressing gratitude and admiration. Some spoke about how the music had reminded them of their own experiences, their memories, and the emotions they had tucked away. Others simply thanked her for sharing something beautiful. She listened, smiling and nodding, feeling both humbled and encouraged. The simple request had turned into an opportunity to make a meaningful impact, far beyond what she had expected. In the following days, the ripple effect of that performance became more evident. Invitations to play at schools, small cultural events, and even local charities continued to arrive. Each request carried the potential for a similar connection, a chance to create moments of joy, reflection, and hope. She began to approach her practice differently, focusing not only on technical skill, but also on emotion, presence, and authenticity. Every note became a chance to communicate something deeper, something that transcended words. She also began to notice subtle changes within herself. Her confidence grew, not in an arrogant way, but as a quiet trust in her own abilities and in the power of honesty in her music. She became more patient, more observant, and more willing to take risks in her performances. Each audience she played for taught her something new, not only about music but also about human connection. She realized that the impact of a performance was not just about the sound, but about the shared experience and the energy exchanged between performer and listener. One evening, she received a letter from someone who had attended one of her events. The writer explained how the music had given them courage during a difficult time, allowing them to face challenges they had been avoiding. She read the words slowly, letting them sink in. It was one thing to see reactions in the moment, but another to realize that her music could continue to touch lives long after it had been played. It strengthened her belief that the path she was on mattered, that each note she played could be a small act of healing and inspiration. She began to experiment more with her performances, exploring new melodies, rhythms, and expressions. She sought to capture emotions that were universal: joy, sorrow, hope, longing, and to share them in a way that was both personal and relatable. Each rehearsal became a journey, a time to discover new possibilities and to connect with the deeper parts of herself. She realized that her music had the ability to grow and change with her, and that every performance was an opportunity to learn and to share. The communities she played for also began to feel the effects of her performances. People discussed the music long after the events, sharing their experiences and the emotions it had stirred. Children were inspired to try music themselves, adults reflected on memories and feelings, and friends connected over shared impressions of the melodies. The simple acts of playing and listening had created ripples, small yet meaningful, spreading beyond the walls of the venues and into daily lives. She remained humble throughout the process. She knew that the magic came not just from her own hands but from the interaction between herself and the audience. Each person brought their own experiences, emotions, and openness, and together they created something that was larger than any one individual. The simple melody had become a symbol of shared humanity, a reminder that even the smallest acts of expression could have profound effects. As weeks turned into months, She continued to play at various events, each time feeling the same sense of anticipation, excitement, and connection. She noticed that her approach to life outside music was also changing. She listened more attentively, responded more thoughtfully, and embraced opportunities with a sense of openness and curiosity. Music had taught her patience, empathy, and the importance of presence, lessons that extended far beyond the stage. She also began to mentor a few young musicians, sharing not only techniques but also the understanding that music was a way to communicate beyond words. She encouraged them to play honestly, to explore emotions freely, and to trust the connection that could form between performer and listener. She saw the same spark in their eyes that had been in hers, a quiet understanding of the power of music to change moments and lives. Through it all, she never forgot the simple request that started it all. It had been just a few notes, a brief melody, yet it had led to experiences, connections, and transformations she could never have imagined. She realized that life often unfolded in unexpected ways, and that embracing opportunities with openness and courage could lead to moments of extraordinary meaning. The simple melody had taught her that even the smallest gestures could ripple outward, touching hearts and inspiring others. It had changed the way she viewed her own abilities, her purpose, and the potential of music to communicate what words could not. She felt gratitude for every audience, every connection, and every note she played, knowing that each one contributed to a journey of growth, discovery, and shared humanity. Late one night, she sat at her piano in the quiet of her home, reflecting on everything that had happened. The music flowed gently under her fingers, carrying the echoes of past performances and the promise of future ones. She understood now that her path was not defined by fame or recognition but by the connections she made and the emotions she could awaken in others. The simple melody had unleashed something far greater than she had ever expected, and she was ready to continue exploring the endless possibilities it offered. Time passed, and her life had quietly changed. What began as a simple request to play a melody had transformed into something far greater than she could have imagined. She had discovered not only the power of music but also the strength within herself to share it freely, honestly, and fully. Each performance had been a lesson, a reminder that connection and emotion mattered more than technique or applause. The small beginnings had led to a life filled with purpose and joy she had not expected. She continued to receive invitations to play at various events, some small, some larger, but she treated each one with the same care and attention. Every performance was an opportunity to reach someone's heart, to offer a moment of beauty and reflection. She found that the simple act of playing could touch lives in ways words never could, and she embraced it fully. Each audience brought something new, a fresh perspective, and she learned to listen not just with her ears, but with her heart. With each passing day, her confidence grew. She felt comfortable experimenting with melodies, adding small flourishes and expressions that reflected her own emotions. She learned to trust her instincts, to follow the flow of music rather than rigidly sticking to notes on a page. This freedom allowed her to connect more deeply with listeners, creating performances that were not just heard but felt. She began to notice subtle changes in herself as well, becoming more patient, empathetic, and present in every moment. She also began mentoring younger musicians, sharing the lessons she had learned. She encouraged them to play with honesty and emotion, to let the music speak for itself, and to trust in the connections it could create. She watched with pride as their confidence grew, and she realized that the impact of her music extended beyond her own performances. It was creating a ripple effect, inspiring others to explore their own gifts and share them with the world. The community around her took notice too. People who had attended her performances spoke about how the music had inspired them, helped them reflect, or simply brought moments of joy into their lives. Children who had watched her play at schools started exploring instruments themselves. Adults shared stories and memories stirred by her melodies, and friends began to bond over shared experiences of the music. The simple melody had become more than a song. It had become a symbol of connection, hope, and the beauty of shared moments. One evening, she was asked to play at a larger cultural event. The venue was filled with people from different backgrounds, all curious to hear her music. She felt a familiar flutter of nerves but also a quiet excitement. As she sat at the piano, she remembered every performance that had come before, the lessons learned, and the connections made. She took a deep breath and began to play. The melody started simply, but as her hands moved, it grew, just as it always had, carrying emotion, meaning, and energy to everyone present. The audience responded immediately, leaning forward, closing their eyes, or simply listening in silence. She felt the same connection she had experienced so many times before, a shared rhythm and understanding that went beyond words. Each note seemed to resonate in the hearts of the listeners, creating a bond that was invisible but undeniable. She played with freedom and honesty, letting the music flow through her, shaping it in the moment with emotion and intuition. When the final notes lingered in the air, there was a moment of complete silence. Then the audience erupted into applause, standing and cheering. Some had tears in their eyes, others smiled in quiet awe, and many whispered to each other, expressing gratitude and admiration. She felt a deep sense of fulfillment, a recognition that the simple act of sharing her music had created something truly meaningful. She knew that this was what her journey had been leading to, a life where every note could carry connection and impact. After the event, she walked home slowly, reflecting on everything she had experienced. She thought about the people who had come to listen, the emotions she had stirred, and the way her music had grown beyond herself. The simple melody that had started it all had unlocked something powerful, not just in her, but in everyone who had been present. She realized that life could change in small, unexpected ways, and that embracing opportunities with courage and openness could lead to moments of extraordinary meaning. She continued to play in different settings, from intimate gatherings to larger stages, always remembering the essence of the first performance that had changed everything. Each performance was a chance to connect, to share, and to create moments that could linger in people's hearts long after the music had ended. She had learned to trust in the power of honesty, emotion, and presence, and she knew that this was what made her performances truly special. Her personal life also began to reflect the lessons of her music. She approached relationships, work, and daily interactions with more empathy, patience, and attentiveness. She listened more carefully, responded more thoughtfully, and embraced each day with a sense of curiosity and openness. Music had taught her not only how to connect with others through sound, but also how to be present and intentional in every part of her life. She often reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the first simple request to play a melody, to the performances that had moved countless people, she had grown in ways she had never expected. She realized that talent alone was not enough. It was the willingness to share, to be vulnerable, and to connect that made the difference. Each performance, each audience, each moment of connection had shaped her life, guiding her toward a purpose she had only begun to understand. One day, she received a letter from a parent whose child had attended one of her performances. The parent wrote about how the music had inspired the child to explore an instrument for the first time, and how it had sparked creativity and confidence. Reading the words, she felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The music she had shared was now inspiring new generations, continuing the ripple effect that had started with a single, simple melody. She continued to mentor young musicians, teach small classes, and perform at events, always with the same dedication and honesty. She understood that her journey was not about fame or recognition, but about creating moments of connection, beauty, and inspiration. She embraced every opportunity to share her music, knowing that each performance could make a difference, however small, in someone's life. As she sat quietly at her piano one evening, reflecting on her journey, she realized how far she had come. The simple melody that had begun as a small request had transformed her life, teaching her about courage, empathy, connection, and the quiet power of sharing one's gifts. She felt gratitude for every person who had listened, every child inspired, every audience touched by her music. Each one had contributed to a life filled with meaning and joy. The melody continued to flow through her fingers, carrying the echoes of past performances and the promise of future ones. She understood now that music was not just an art form. It was a bridge, a way to communicate what words could not. It was a way to connect, to to heal, to inspire, and to leave a lasting impact on the world. And she knew that as long as she played with honesty and heart, the simple melody would continue to change lives, including her own. She closed her eyes and let the music fill the room, feeling a quiet sense of completeness. Life had led her to this point, a place where a single act of sharing her gift had transformed everything. She smiled softly, knowing that this was only the beginning, and that the journey would continue, guided by music, connection, and the simple melody that had changed everything.